The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, slipped into my mailbox between a credit card offer and a pizza coupon, and it might as well have been a declaration of war. I stood there on my driveway in Phoenix, Arizona, reading the words 3 times before my brain could actually process what the Heritage Hills Homeowners Association was demanding from me. They wanted a key to my private gate. My gate, the one I had just spent $12,000 installing around my property after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood last fall. I'm Mitchell Dawson, and I've lived in this house for 8 years. I work as a civil engineer, which means I know a thing or two about property lines, surveys, and legal boundaries. The gate in question wasn't some decorative addition at the front of my driveway. This was a legitimate security measure that enclosed my entire backyard and the eastern side of my property, which happened to back up against a wash that runs through the development. The gate provided the only access point to a small maintenance area where the city sometimes needed to clear debris after monsoon season, but that access easement was clearly documented in my property deed as being my responsibility to maintain, not the HOA's. The letter was signed by one Patricia Whitmore, president of the Heritage Hills HOA board. I'd seen her around the neighborhood, always walking her tiny dog and peering into people's yards like she was conducting surveillance. She was the type who measured the height of your grass and counted how many potted plants you had on your porch against the covenant regulations. I called my buddy James that evening while standing in my backyard, looking at the gate that had become the subject of this ridiculous demand. "They want what?" James asked, his voice crackling through my phone speaker. "A key to my gate. They're saying it's necessary for neighborhood safety and security purposes." I read directly from the letter. "It says here that all points of egress must be accessible to HOA representatives for emergency purposes and regular inspections." "That's insane. It's your private property." "Exactly. The gate doesn't block any common areas. It's entirely on my lot." James worked as a real estate attorney, though his specialty was commercial properties rather than residential disputes. Still, he knew enough to tell me I should probably lawyer up if this escalated. But I wasn't ready to spend money on an attorney yet, not when I had something better: my property survey. The next morning, I went to my filing cabinet and pulled out the folder containing all my closing documents from when I bought the house. The survey was pristine, professionally drawn, showing every inch of my property boundaries. The gate sat entirely within my property lines, a full 6 feet from the nearest boundary marker. There was the drainage easement notation, clear as day, stating that the property owner maintains responsibility for the access point, with city rights to enter for maintenance twice annually with 48 hours notice. I scanned the document and composed an email to Patricia Whitmore, attaching the survey and politely declining her request. I explained that the gate was private property, that no HOA covenant granted them access to private gates or fences, and that the city had the appropriate easement already documented. I kept my tone professional and factual, figuring this would be the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, I came home from work to find a new letter taped to my front door. This one wasn't mailed through the postal service. Someone had walked up to my house and attached it directly. The letter informed me that I was in violation of HOA covenants and that I had 15 days to provide the gate key or face daily fines of $50. The letter cited Section 12 of the covenants, which dealt with exterior modifications and required HOA approval for any structures that might impact neighborhood aesthetics or safety. I sat at my kitchen table and pulled up the full HOA covenant document on my laptop. Section 12 was about approval for modifications, sure, but I had gotten approval. I remembered the process clearly. When I first planned the gate installation, I'd submitted the proper architectural review application, including drawings and specifications. The review committee had approved it within 3 weeks. I even had the approval letter saved in my email. I found the email thread and printed it out. The approval from the Architectural Review Committee was signed by 3 board members, including one Donald Richardson, who apparently no longer lived in the neighborhood. The approval specifically mentioned the gate design, the height, the color, and the location. Nothing in the approval mentioned providing keys to anyone. This time, I didn't just email. I printed out my response, attached copies of the survey, the original HOA approval, and the property easement documentation. I drove to Patricia Whitmore's house on Thursday evening and hand-delivered the envelope. She answered the door wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that looked too formal for a weeknight at home. Her blonde hair was styled in that particular suburban way that required weekly salon visits, and her expression when she saw me was already pinched with disapproval. "Mr. Dawson," she said, not quite a question. "Mrs. Whitmore, I wanted to deliver this personally so there's no confusion." I held out the envelope. "All the documentation showing that my gate is compliant, approved, and entirely on my private property. There's no legal basis for your request." She took the envelope but didn't open it. "The board has reviewed the situation. Mr. Dawson, we have concerns about emergency access. The fire department has their own access protocols. They don't need HOA keys, and the police can enter in genuine emergencies. What emergencies are you anticipating that would require you specifically to have access to my backyard?" "That's not the point. The covenants require cooperation with safety measures." "I've cooperated. The gate was approved through proper channels. You're now trying to impose a requirement that wasn't part of that approval and isn't in the covenants." Her mouth tightened. "The board will be discussing this at our next meeting. You'll receive formal notification of our decision." "I look forward to it," I said, keeping my voice level. "In the meantime, those documents explain the legal situation clearly. Have a good evening." I walked back to my truck before she could respond. My hands were shaking slightly as I drove home, not from fear, but from the sheer absurdity of the situation. I'd followed every rule, gotten every approval, and now they were inventing new requirements just because they wanted control over something they had no right to control. The weekend passed quietly. I spent Saturday working on my woodworking project in the garage and Sunday watching football. But Monday brought a new development that made the situation much worse. I was at my drafting table at work when my phone rang. The number was local, but not one I recognized. "Mr. Dawson, this is Kevin from AZ Lock and Security. We installed your gate system last year." "Right, I remember. What's going on?" "I got a weird call this morning. Someone claiming to be from your HOA said they needed us to make a duplicate key for your gate. They said it was for emergency purposes and that you'd authorized it." My jaw clenched. I absolutely did not authorize that. "Yeah, I figured. That's why I'm calling. The woman was pretty insistent, said her name was Patricia something. She had your address and the date of installation, which was concerning. She must have gotten that information somehow. I filed for the permit with the city. It's public record. She could have looked it up." "Probably. Anyway, I told her we can't duplicate keys without written authorization from the property owner." She didn't like that answer, said she'd find another locksmith. My stomach dropped. She's going to shop around until she finds someone who'll do it. Most legitimate companies won't, but yeah, she might find someone less careful. I'd recommend changing your locks just to be safe. I can come out tomorrow if you want. Do it, and upgrade to something more secure if possible. I've got a high-security deadbolt system that's pretty much impossible to duplicate without the manufacturer's code. It's pricier, but sounds like you might need it. We scheduled for Tuesday afternoon. I'd have to leave work early, but this had escalated beyond a simple dispute. Patricia Whitmore was actively trying to gain unauthorized access to my property. That crossed a line from annoying to potentially illegal. Tuesday afternoon, Kevin showed up right on schedule. He was a guy in his 30s with a company polo and a toolbox that looked well used. He examined the existing gate lock and whistled. "She really tried to get this duplicated? This is already a pretty secure system." Apparently that wasn't secure enough for my peace of mind anymore. He installed the new high-security system, which required a special key that had a computer chip embedded in it. The key couldn't be duplicated at a regular hardware store, and even most locksmiths couldn't copy it without sending away to the manufacturer with proof of ownership. "This should do it," Kevin said, handing me 3 keys. "Keep one, give one to someone you trust, and put one in a safe place. If you ever need duplicates, you have to request them directly from the manufacturer with your ownership code." He handed me a card with a 16-digit code printed on it. "Don't lose that." I paid him, thanked him profusely, and felt slightly better about the situation. At least my gate was secure now. That security lasted until Thursday, when I received another letter. This one was different. It came via certified mail, requiring my signature. The return address was a law office in Scottsdale. I opened it in my kitchen, my coffee getting cold while I read the legal jargon. The law firm of Morrison and Associates, representing the Heritage Hills HOA, was formally notifying me that I was in breach of HOA covenants and the daily fines of $50 would begin accruing effective immediately. Furthermore, if I did not provide the requested gate key within 30 days, the HOA would seek a court order to compel compliance and would place a lien on my property for unpaid fines. Now I was angry. They were threatening to put a lien on my house over a gate that I had every legal right to lock. I called James immediately. "They're threatening a lien," I told him, reading from the letter. "Okay, now you need a real lawyer. Not me, someone who specializes in HOA disputes. I can give you a referral." "This is insane, James. I followed all their rules." "I know, but they're escalating. You need someone who knows this area of law inside and out." He gave me the name of Rebecca Chen, an attorney who apparently dealt with HOA disputes regularly. I called her office that afternoon and got an appointment for Monday morning. Rebecca Chen's office was in a modest building in Tempe, not one of those intimidating glass towers downtown. She was younger than I expected, maybe in her late 30s, with sharp eyes and a handshake that meant business. "Tell me everything," she said, settling behind her desk with a legal pad. I walked her through the entire situation, from the first letter to the installation of the enhanced security system to the legal threat. I'd brought all my documentation, the original HOA approval, the property survey, the easement paperwork, the covenant documents, and every letter I'd received. She reviewed everything methodically, making notes. When she finished, she looked up with an expression that was almost amused. "They don't have a case," she said. "Not even close. You got approval through the proper architectural review process. The gate is on your property. There's no covenant provision that grants them access to private gates or requires you to provide keys." "So why are they pushing this?" "Control, usually. HOA boards can get drunk on their little bit of power, or there's something else going on that you don't know about. Has there been any other conflict with this board president?" "Not directly with me, but I've heard she's difficult. She sent a violation notice to my neighbor last year because he parked his work truck in his driveway overnight. He's a plumber, has his company name on the truck. She said it was advertising and violated the covenant against home businesses." "Did she win that one?" "No, he fought it and won. The covenant does prohibit running a business from home, but parking a work vehicle isn't the same thing." Rebecca nodded. "She sounds like the type who doesn't like being told no. Here's what we're going to do. I'll draft a response to their attorney, citing all the documentation you've provided. I'll make it clear that you're in full compliance with all covenants and that their demand has no legal basis. I'll also note that their continued harassment could constitute a claim for abuse of process. What are the chances they back down?" "Honestly, 50-50. A reasonable attorney would advise them to drop it after seeing this documentation, but HOA boards don't always listen to reasonable advice, especially when someone like Patricia is driving the bus. Be prepared for this to escalate further." "How much further?" "They might actually file a lawsuit seeking a court order. It would be a waste of everyone's time and money, but they might do it anyway. If they do, we'll fight it and we'll win. And when we win, we can seek attorney's fees since their claim is frivolous." The thought of going to court over a gate key was exhausting, but I'd already come this far. "Do whatever you need to do." Rebecca drafted the response letter that afternoon. It was 3 pages of legal reasoning, polite but firm, explaining exactly why the HOA's demand was without merit. She cited specific case law from Arizona regarding property rights and HOA authority. She sent it directly to Morrison and Associates, copying Patricia Whitmore and the HOA board. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing. I started to hope that maybe Rebecca's letter had done the trick, that they'd realized they were overreaching and backed down. Then, the lawsuit arrived. Heritage Hills Homeowners Association versus Mitchell Dawson. They were actually suing me. The complaint alleged that I was in violation of HOA covenants, that my refusal to provide emergency access endangered the neighborhood, and that I was refusing to cooperate with reasonable safety measures. They sought a court order compelling me to provide a gate key and payment of accumulated fines, which they calculated at over $2,000 now. I called Rebecca as soon as I got served with the papers. "I saw it," she said. "They filed this morning. It's as weak as I expected. We'll file our response and a motion to dismiss. The judge is going to see right through this. How long will this take? Couple of months, probably. Arizona courts move reasonably fast for civil cases like this. First hearing will probably be scheduled within 6 weeks. The waiting was harder than I expected. Every time I pulled into my driveway and saw that gate, I thought about the absurdity of the situation. I'd installed it for security after break-ins in the neighborhood, and now the HOA was suing me over it. The stress started affecting my work. I'd sit at my desk trying to focus on engineering plans, and my mind would drift to the lawsuit. I started having trouble sleeping, lying awake at night running through arguments and scenarios. My neighbor Tom noticed. He lived 2 houses down, a retired guy who spent most of his time working on his classic car collection. "You okay?" he asked one Saturday when he caught me staring blankly at my gate while getting my mail. I explained the situation. His face darkened as I talked. "Patricia is behind this?" "Leading the charge. That woman is a menace. She tried to find me last month because my garbage cans were visible from the street. They were out for pickup, Mitchell. Where else was I supposed to put them?" "Did you pay the fine?" "Hell no, I told her to pound sand. She backed down after I threatened to show up at the board meeting with my own attorney." That gave me an idea. "When's the next board meeting?" "Third Wednesday of every month, 7 p.m. at the clubhouse." I showed up at the April board meeting with a folder full of documentation and a voice recorder app running on my phone. Arizona is a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record the conversation as long as I was part of it. The clubhouse was a small building near the neighborhood entrance with a meeting room that held maybe 30 people. 6 board members sat at a table at the front, Patricia Whitmore in the center chair. About a dozen residents were scattered in the audience chairs. Patricia's expression when she saw me walk in was priceless. Her jaw actually tightened visibly. The meeting started with standard business, budget reports, landscaping updates, a discussion about repainting the neighborhood entrance monument. When they opened the floor for homeowner comments, I stood up. "Mitchell Dawson, 4127 Desert Vista Drive. I'd like to address the lawsuit the HOA has filed against me." "That matter is in litigation and not appropriate for discussion here," Patricia said immediately. "I disagree. The HOA membership is paying for this lawsuit through their dues. They have a right to know what it's about." I looked around at the other residents. "The HOA is suing me because I won't give them a key to my private gate, a gate that was properly approved through the architectural review process that sits entirely on my private property and that I installed for security after the break-ins last November." Murmurs went through the small audience. People were paying attention now. "Mr. Dawson, you're out of order," Patricia said. "I'm a homeowner addressing the board during homeowner comment time. That's exactly in order." I pulled out my survey. "I have documentation showing my property boundaries. I have the original HOA approval for the gate. I have the property easement paperwork. Not one document requires me to give the HOA access to my private property." One of the other board members, a man named Carl, spoke up. "Patricia, did he really get approval for this gate?" "The Architectural Review Committee approved a gate design, not his refusal to provide access," Patricia said. "The approval didn't require me to provide keys because there's no covenant provision that gives you that right," I said. "You're inventing requirements that don't exist in the covenants, and you're using HOA funds to litigate a losing case. I want the membership to know that." "This is a safety issue," Patricia insisted. "Emergency access is critical." "Emergency services have their own protocols. The fire department doesn't need your permission or your keys to access properties, neither do police. What you're really saying is that you personally want access to my private property, and I'm asking you to explain why." She didn't have a good answer for that. Her face flushed red. "This discussion is over. Next item on the agenda." But the damage was done. After the meeting, 3 different homeowners approached me. One woman named Sandra told me she had also had conflicts with Patricia over minor alleged violations. "She's on a power trip," Sandra said quietly. "A bunch of us have talked about trying to vote her out, but she has friends on the board who support her." "How does the election process work?" "Annual meeting in June. All board positions are up for re-election every year. You need someone to run against her." I filed that information away. June was still weeks away, but it was an option if the lawsuit didn't go my way. The court date arrived on a Wednesday morning in late May. The hearing was in Maricopa County Superior Court, in one of those courtrooms that always smell like old paper and air conditioning. Rebecca met me outside, wearing a sharp navy suit and carrying a briefcase that looked heavy with documentation. "Ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be." The HOA was represented by Marcus Morrison himself, senior partner of Morrison and Associates. He was a guy in his late 50s with silver hair and an expensive suit. Patricia Whitmore sat behind him in the gallery, her expression smug. The judge was Honorable Susan Martinez, who looked to be in her mid-40s and had a reputation, according to Rebecca, for not tolerating nonsense. Morrison presented his case first. He argued that the HOA had a legitimate interest in emergency access, that my refusal to provide a key was unreasonable, and that the covenants gave the HOA broad authority to ensure neighborhood safety. Then it was Rebecca's turn. She walked Judge Martinez through every document, the property survey showing the gate on my private property, the original HOA approval with no mention of key requirements, the covenant provisions that specifically outlined what homeowners had to provide the HOA with access to. Spoiler, private gates weren't on the list, and case law supporting property owner rights. "Your Honor," Rebecca said, "the HOA is attempting to exercise authority it simply doesn't have. Mr. Dawson followed every rule. He got approval through the proper channels. His gate doesn't block any common areas or violate any covenant provisions. The HOA's demand for a key is an overreach without any legal basis." Judge Martinez looked at Morrison. "Counselor, can you cite any specific covenant provision that requires homeowners to provide the HOA with keys to private gates?" Morrison shuffled his papers. "The general safety provisions in Section 8, Your Honor, give the board authority to implement reasonable safety measures." "That's not what I asked. Is there a specific provision requiring gate keys?" "Not in those exact words, Your Honor, but the spirit of the covenants." "I deal in the letter of the law, Counselor, not its spirit. Does your client have any evidence that Mr. Dawson's gate poses a legitimate safety concern?" "The lack of emergency access. Emergency services have their own access protocols, correct? They don't require HOA keys to do their jobs?" "That's correct, Your Honor, but then I'm not seeing the emergency." Judge Martinez looked at the documents in front of her. "The gate was approved through proper channels. It's on private property. No covenant requires the homeowner to provide access. This appears to be a significant overreach by the HOA board." My heart started beating faster. This was going well. Judge Martinez continued, "I'm granting the defendant's motion to dismiss. The HOA has no legal basis for their demand. The accumulated fines are vacated. Furthermore, I'm awarding attorney's fees to the defendant. The HOA will reimburse Mr. Dawson for his legal costs in defending this frivolous lawsuit." Morrison stood. "Your Honor, if I may." "You may not. My ruling is final." Case dismissed. The gavel came down, and I felt like I could breathe for the first time in weeks. Rebecca squeezed my shoulder, grinning. "Told you we'd win." Behind us, I heard Patricia Whitmore make a strangled sound of frustration. When I turned to leave the courtroom, I saw her glaring at me with pure hatred. This wasn't over for her, I could tell. She'd lost, but she wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. Sure enough, the harassment continued, just in different forms. 2 days after the court hearing, I got a violation notice for weeds in my gravel landscaping. I went outside and examined every inch of my front yard. There were 3 tiny plants, maybe 2 inches tall, growing near my mailbox. I pulled them and took photos showing my immaculate yard. A week later, another violation notice arrived. This one claimed my house paint was faded and needed refreshing. My house had been repainted 18 months ago. The paint was perfect. Patricia was retaliating, issuing bogus violations to harass me. Each violation came with a fine if not corrected within 14 days, and each one required me to either comply with a made-up problem or formally dispute it in writing. I documented everything. Photos, dated and time-stamped, copies of every letter. I was building a case for harassment. The annual HOA meeting in June couldn't come fast enough. Sandra, the woman I'd met after the board meeting, called me 3 weeks before. "We want to run a slate of candidates against Patricia's people," she said. "Clean house. Are you interested in joining the board?" "I don't know if I'd be good at it." "You stood up to Patricia. That's exactly what we need. We have 5 people willing to run. We need 7 to fill all the positions. Will you consider it?" I thought about it for a day and agreed. If I was on the board, I could prevent this kind of harassment from happening to other homeowners. And frankly, I wanted Patricia Whitmore out of power. The campaign, if you could call it that, was informal. Sandra created a flyer explaining who we were and what we stood for: reasonable enforcement of actual covenant violations, transparent budgeting, and an end to petty harassment. We distributed the flyers to every house in the neighborhood. Patricia's people responded with their own flyers, warning about radical elements trying to take over the HOA and eliminate important safety measures. They didn't mention me by name, but everyone knew who they were talking about. The annual meeting was held in the clubhouse on a Wednesday evening in mid-June. The room was packed. I'd never seen this many residents at an HOA meeting. People were standing along the walls because all the chairs were full. Patricia called the meeting to order and tried to rush through the business portions, but people kept interrupting with questions. Questions about the budget, about legal expenses. My lawsuit had cost the HOA over $15,000 in attorney fees, both their own and the reimbursement to me, about the constant violation notices some residents were receiving. "We're getting to all of that," Patricia kept saying, but her composure was cracking. She wasn't used to being challenged like this. When we finally got to the board elections, Sandra nominated our slate of candidates. We each stood and gave a brief statement about why we were running. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. "I'm running because I believe HOAs should serve the homeowners, not control them. I fought a lawsuit over my right to lock my own gate, and I won. I don't want anyone else to have to go through that. The board should enforce legitimate covenant violations while respecting property rights. That's what I'll do if elected." The room erupted in applause. Not everyone, but enough that I knew we had support. Patricia and her allies gave their statements, mostly focused on their experience and the importance of maintaining neighborhood standards. Patricia's voice was tight with barely controlled anger when she spoke. The voting was done by paper ballot, counted by a neutral third party that Sandra had hired to ensure fairness. The counting took 20 minutes. The room buzzed with conversation while we waited. When the results were announced, Patricia's face went white. Our slate had won every single position. It wasn't even close. We'd won with about 70% of the vote. Patricia stood abruptly, grabbing her purse. "This is a disgrace," she said, her voice shaking. "You're all going to regret this when your property values plummet, because no one's enforcing standards." "The standards will be enforced," Sandra said calmly. "The actual standards, not made-up ones." Patricia stormed out, her heels clicking angrily on the floor. 2 of her board allies followed. The rest stayed for the transition meeting. The transition was supposed to be a simple handover of records and accounts. It wasn't. Our first official board meeting as the new members was the following week. We requested all HOA records, financial documents, and keys to the clubhouse and other common areas. Patricia was supposed to deliver them as outgoing president, but she didn't show up. Sandra, now our new president, called her. "Patricia, we need the records." "I'm still organizing them." Patricia's voice came through the speakerphone. "It will take time. The bylaws require immediate transfer upon election of new board members. We need them by this weekend." "That's not possible." Sandra's expression hardened. "Then we'll have our attorney send a formal demand letter. The HOA owns those records, Patricia. You can't withhold them." Patricia hung up. We sat there looking at each other. "She's going to make this difficult," Carl said. He'd been re-elected to the board as one of our slate. "I know her. She doesn't let go of power easily." He was right. 3 days and an attorney letter later, Patricia finally agreed to deliver the records. She showed up at the clubhouse with several boxes, dumped them on the table, and left without a word. It took us hours to sort through everything. The financial records were a mess. Expenses weren't properly categorized. There were receipts for things that seemed questionable. A $600 dinner at a steakhouse charged to the HOA, landscaping services for what turned out to be Patricia's own property, multiple charges for consulting services that had no documentation. "This looks like embezzlement," I said, holding up a receipt for landscaping at Patricia's address. Sandra's face was grim. "We need a forensic accountant. This needs to be documented properly." We hired an accountant who specialized in fraud investigation. She spent 2 weeks going through 3 years of HOA financial records. Her report was damning. Patricia Whitmore had embezzled approximately $42,000 from the HOA over 3 years. It was done in small increments: false invoices, personal expenses charged to HOA accounts, cash withdrawals that weren't documented. She'd been careful, but not careful enough. We had a decision to make. We could handle this internally, demand repayment, and move on. Or we could go to the police. "She needs to be held accountable," Sandra said at our emergency board meeting. "If we let this go, we're telling her it's okay to steal from people." "We're also talking about criminal charges," Carl said. "That's serious." "So is stealing $42,000 from your neighbors?" I said. "I vote we report it." The vote was unanimous. Sandra called the Phoenix Police Department the next morning. Detective William Hayes came to interview us 2 days later. He was a guy in his 40s with tired eyes and a methodical way of asking questions. We gave him all the documentation: the accountant's report, the receipts, bank statements, everything. "This is solid," he said, reviewing the papers. "We'll open an investigation." The investigation took 6 weeks. During that time, Patricia realized what was happening. She showed up at Sandra's house one evening, banging on the door. Sandra called me immediately. "She's on my porch. I think you should come over." I drove to Sandra's house and found Patricia standing on the porch, her face blotchy with tears and rage. "You're destroying my life," she screamed when she saw me. "Over what? A stupid gate? You couldn't just give me the key and avoid all this?" "This isn't about the gate anymore, Patricia. This is about you stealing from the HOA." "I didn't steal anything. Those were legitimate expenses." "Getting your personal lawn landscaped isn't a legitimate HOA expense. The accountant found dozens of charges like that. You're lying. You're all lying because I enforced the rules and you didn't like it. The police have all the documentation. If you have evidence that those charges were legitimate, I'm sure they'd love to see it." She lunged at me, actually lunged, hands reaching for my face like she was going to scratch or hit me. I stepped back and Sandra moved between us. "Get off my property," Sandra said firmly. "Now, or I'm calling the police right now for assault." Patricia stumbled back, breathing hard. "You'll regret this, all of you." She turned and half ran back to her car. Sandra and I watched her drive away. "That was terrifying," Sandra said. "Yeah, but also kind of sad. She really can't see that she did anything wrong." The police arrested Patricia Whitmore on a Tuesday morning in August. She was charged with felony theft and fraud. The arrest made the local news, not because it was particularly unusual, but because HOA embezzlement was apparently a growing problem in Arizona. I watched the news report that evening, sitting in my living room with a beer. They showed footage of Patricia being led out of her house in handcuffs, her face hidden behind her hands. Part of me felt bad for her, but mostly I felt relief that she couldn't hurt anyone else in the neighborhood. Her trial was scheduled for November, but she took a plea deal in October. She pled guilty to 1 count of felony theft, agreed to repay the full amount she'd stolen plus penalties, and was sentenced to 2 years of probation and 200 hours of community service. She also had to resign from any HOA positions and was prohibited from serving on any HOA board in Arizona for 10 years. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The new board focused on actual covenant enforcement, meaning we addressed real issues like broken fences and abandoned cars, but stopped harassing people over tiny weeds or the color of their mailbox. Complaints dropped to almost nothing. I stayed on the board for 2 years before deciding I'd done my part, and it was time to let someone else serve. My gate remained locked tight, with my high security lock keeping my property safe exactly as intended. The whole experience taught me something important about standing up for yourself. When that first letter arrived demanding a key to my gate, I could have just given in. It would have been easier. But sometimes the easy path isn't the right one. Patricia Whitmore was a bully who used her position to control and exploit people, and if I'd backed down, she would have kept doing it to others. The survey I showed them, the documentation I maintained, the willingness to fight in court, all of it mattered. Not just for me, but for everyone in Heritage Hills who'd been dealing with her petty tyranny for years. I still live in that house. The gate still stands, more secure than ever. Every time I unlock it and pull into my driveway, I remember what it took to defend my right to that simple privacy. And I'm glad I did. The neighborhood is better now. The HOA functions the way it should, maintaining common areas and enforcing reasonable standards without the harassment and power games. People actually show up to meetings now because they know their voices will be heard. Sandra stayed on as president for 3 years before moving to Colorado for her retirement. Carl took over after that, and he's doing a great job. We've even managed to build up a healthy reserve fund, something Patricia had depleted with her theft. Last week, I saw Tom working on his classic cars in his driveway. His garbage cans were out for pickup, visible from the street, and nobody cared. That's how it should be. The legal fees I was awarded by the court covered most of Rebecca's bills, though I did end up paying a bit out of pocket. It was worth every penny. Sometimes you have to invest in protecting your rights. I've heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Patricia moved to Tucson after her probation ended. Apparently she's working retail and living in an apartment, a far cry from her old life. I don't take pleasure in that, but I also don't feel guilty. She made her choices. The drainage easement that started this whole thing still gets maintained by the city twice a year, just like the documentation said. They call me 48 hours ahead, I unlock my gate, they do their work, and I lock it back up. Simple. Professional, the way it always should have been. My advice to anyone dealing with an overreaching HOA: document everything. Keep copies of every letter, every email, every conversation if possible. Know your covenants inside and out. Get your property surveyed if there's any question about boundaries. And don't be afraid to lawyer up when they cross the line from annoying to illegal. HOAs serve a purpose. They maintain common areas, enforce basic standards that protect property values, and organize community activities. But they're not governments, and they don't have unlimited power over your private property. When they forget that, you have to remind them. Looking back, the whole situation was exhausting and stressful. There were nights I couldn't sleep, days I couldn't focus at work, moments I wondered if it was worth the fight. But yeah, it was worth it. My property, my gate, my rights. Nobody gets to take those away just because they have a little authority and a desire for control. The gate stands as a reminder, not just of security against break-ins, but of the importance of standing your ground when you're right. Patricia Whitmore demanded a key. I showed her my survey and locked it tighter. And in the end, justice prevailed. The neighborhood kids still ride their bikes past my house on their way to the park. Neighbors still wave when they walk their dogs. Life goes on in Heritage Hills, better than before, because people stood up and said enough is enough. I'm proud of that. Proud that I didn't back down. Proud that the fight led to uncovering real corruption. Proud that the neighborhood is better off because people were willing to challenge authority when it was abused. My gate is just a gate, metal and locks and hinges. But it represents something more now. It represents the principle that your home is your castle, your private property deserves respect. And no amount of bureaucratic bullying should make you surrender your rights. That's a principle worth fighting for. And if I ever face something similar again, I'll fight just as hard. Because once you've stood up to a bully and won, you learn that you're stronger than you thought. You learn that documentation and perseverance matter. You learn that the system, for all its flaws, can work when you use it properly. The heritage of Heritage Hills isn't about perfectly manicured lawns or uniform mailbox colors. It's about a community that learned to stand together against abuse of power. That's the real legacy of the whole gate situation. And my gate? It's still locked tight, exactly where it belongs, protecting exactly what it should protect. My property, my privacy, my rights. Nobody's getting a key unless I decide to give them one. That's how it started, that's how it ended, and that's how it's going to stay.